Hello everybody, welcome to the first episode of CG Unscripted, which is going to be things that have to do with computer graphics. That's what the CG stands for. So we've got visual effects and 3D animation and modeling and rendering and all these different things. And every episode we're going to be covering a different aspect of computer graphics and production, post-production, things like that. So for this first episode of CG Unscripted, we're going to take a look at modeling in Cinema 4D and texturing in Redshift. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually go ahead and make the CG Unscripted logo. And I'm going to show you the steps that went into behind making that logo and how you can build it and then how you can texture it in Redshift. So if you want to learn Cinema 4D and you want to learn Redshift, this I think is going to have a nice mix of techniques for the intermediate, or Cinema 4D user and the sort of person just starting to really get into Redshift, so beginning to intermediate with some advanced techniques in there as well. So here we go. This is what we're going to create here. It's kind of like a logo that's done in Cinema 4D and Redshift, and you can see that it's got a mix of materials. There's this kind of wood material in this box over here. And then it's got like this sort of like woodish type of material with these letters on it. And this sort of like greenish, it's kind of like a distressed copper, the way that I look at it. There's this hammered gold effect. And then this ring sort of like has like an iron, sort of like a bumpy iron texture, and then there's like little copper balls on the end of these iron spikes. So how would we go ahead and making this, and then how do we go ahead and texture it in Redshift? For those who want to follow along with the show, you can go to Gumroad. Actually, you can go to this link, and I will put this link in the description. It's over here. Like that. And you will find that you can get the files that I'm going to be using in this show. Now, you could get them for free. You just, in this name a fair price, you can just type in a 0 and then you'll be able to get them for free. Or if you want to help out the stream and see more streams like this from me about Cinema 4D, Redshift, other 3D programs, I'm planning to do some Unreal Engine. I'm planning to do other things as well, some compositing and so on and so forth. Rigging, of course, always rigging. You can add a little donation to the stream, or you can just type in 0 and get it for free. So, and then once you get that, you will get, I'll show you what you get later, and then you can sort of work. But we're going to assume that we're making this from scratch, okay? Because actually, when you download that, you will get, this is what you'll get. Actually, you won't get this. So let me put this somewhere else. You will get an HDRI in the lighting folder, which we're going to use to light the scene. Okay. You will get a folder of textures, which are all the different textures that we're going to be using to texture this thing. And you will get a untextured version of this logo, So basically just the geometry that we can use to actually go ahead and texture this thing, and then you will get a standard, a textured version with all the Redshift textures in it. So why don't I just open it, actually, just to show you. So the untextured version will obviously look like this. It's just the geometry. There's no textures in this at all. Okay, if you look at the textures here, you'll see that there are no textures. It's just the geometry that's done. If you try to render it in Redshift, okay, you're basically just going to get a white thing. Okay, and then what you'll do is then, like I said, you're going to get a version of it with the standard materials. Okay, and if you render this, oh, this looks like everything's missing, actually. Oh, that's because I opened up the wrong one. By the way, I'll show you a little trick. If you open up a file and your textures are missing and you need to relink the textures, you won't have to do that in the files you download. But I do want to show you this. If you go to the window menu under Asset Browser and you open it, not Asset Browser, I'm sorry. Let me close that. Instead of that, let me close the Asset Browser. If you go to the window and you choose Project Asset Inspector, you'll see that all of these textures have little X next to them, which means that they're all missing. All of these textures are missing from this file. So that's why you're getting missing textures here. So if you select all of them and you go under the Asset, Relink Assets, okay, and then you go to, you just go to the folder that has them in there. You don't have to go to each one, just a folder, and you say select folder, then boom, they'll all come in, and then the textures will be in there. Okay, so like I said, you don't have to worry about that, because actually, let me close this one. I had opened up the wrong file, and I really meant to open up this one. Oh, and they still are unlinked. So anyway, if this happens to you when you download the files, and you unzip them, just select all of these things. Go to the Project Asset Inspector in the window menu, select all of these textures, go to the Asset menu and choose Relink Assets, and then select this folder, and then voila, all the textures will be in there. And now when you open up Redshift, okay, what I like to do, by the way, is I like to bring that Redshift thing over there, split my screen with the Redshift. Let me close the materials for the time being, and then render it here. And then you can see now it's rendering fine in Redshift. But we're actually going to start from scratch. So let's go ahead. Let's close this file. Let's close the Redshift render view. Let's close this file. And let's start with nothing but an empty Cinema 4D file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and start building this thing. So I'm going to start by going and I'm going to make a cube. Okay, so let's make a cube, and we'll make it, about 300. Okay, so one thing you should remember also, by the way, is you should keep an eye on the X, Y, and Z axes of your folder, so of your file, because the X is the red, the Z is the blue, and the Y is the green going up. So really, I was about to make the mistake that I was thinking that this is going to be the front of the box. Okay, so I was going to make this bigger and make that the front of the box, but really that's the right side of the box. because this is the x-axis, and the x-axis always goes like right to left, okay? Whereas the z-axis is the depth. So really, if I was to be more precise, this is the front of my object, and then I could make this like 300 like that, and then I'll make this smaller like that. And if we look at, for our reference, at our original thing, it's going to be, I'm making this wooden box down here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're going to make this a little bit like that. It's going to be something, I'm just eyeballing it, I'm not really trying to do this so perfectly, okay? Just as long as you get the general shape. Now, what I want to do here is that in this box here, I want to make it like a frame. In other words, like if you look at the reference, okay, you can see how, you know, this thing is kind of like a little frame in there, okay? So in order to do that in Cinema 4D, I can do that, but the problem is right now this box is a parametric object, which means that it's not really looking at it as a collection of vertices and polygons, it's looking at it as a cube. So I can't really go, if I choose my polygon tool and I try to select some of the polygons in it, it won't let me because it thinks that it's a cube. It thinks it's a parametric object. So what we want to do is we want to right click on this cube and we want to say make editable. And make editable, what that's going to do is it's going to make it not a parametric object anymore. As you can see, it doesn't look like a cube anymore. It just looks like polygons and points. And now if I choose my, you know, my polygon tool, I can select the individual polygons. And if I select my point tool, I can also select individual points. So, as well as lines. Okay. So that's, you know, if I want to move a line, whatever, out or whatever like that, you know, you can't do that while it's a parametric object. All right, so now what we want to do is, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to select this face. And what I want to do is I want to inset the face, okay, because I want to create like kind of like a frame around this. Now to inset the face, I can actually, I don't know if anybody knew this, but if you were to choose the scale tool and hold down the Alt key while you have that, not the Alt key, the Control key, while you have that face selected, you'll notice how I've inset the face. I've created a new polygon and inset the face. And that can be useful sometimes, okay, but in this case, it's kind of like a little shortcut. In this case, if you'll notice, this side of the border is not is a different size than this top size. Okay, so what I want to do now, so I don't want to do it that way. What I want to choose is I want to choose the Inset tool. And now if I just drag along, you'll notice I'm insetting the face, but something really useful is happening, okay? And that is that it's keeping the edge even all around the thing. And that's good. Now, I want to extrude this back a little bit, okay? So I'm going to take the extrusion tool, okay? And then you can see that I can extrude this back or forward as much as I want, that polygon, okay? And that's called extrusion. Now, the thing, I undid that, by the way. Now, the thing is that I could also actually take the move tool and hold down the Control key and just move it backward, and it's doing the same thing. That's a little shortcut you can use. Okay, so we've got this set up like that, okay? And now what I want to do is I would like to create a plane that I'm going to use for the logo, okay, for the this part of the thing. So first of all, let me go to Photoshop. Okay, and then you can see over here where it says Unscripted with Joe Herman. I want to put that on a plane and stick that plane behind the frame of this box. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my objects and I'm going to create a plane. Okay. Now, you'll notice that it created the plane in the wrong direction. It's like flat on the ground and it's not rotated in the right way. I can do two things. I could either go ahead and I can take the rotation tool and I can rotate this so it's in the right way. By the way, when you do, a lot of times when I work, I change my display to road shading lines so I can actually see the polygons that I'm working with. It's up to you, however you like to work. So I can either take this and I can rotate this like that, or under the plane, under the orientation, I can change it to like -Z. Okay, so you can change the orientation of the plane here without changing its rotation. So that way, its coordinates stay the same. See, if I were to leave it, you know, like however I'm going to leave it was, the default way, okay? And if I were to go to the coordinates and I were to try to rotate it, you notice that I'm rotating it 90 degrees over here. I can just type in a 90 if I want, right? Then I can go like that. But instead, I'm just going to say -Z, and then there it is, -Z in the thing. Now I'm going to move this forward a little bit, and there we go, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and go to the object tool, and I'm just going to fit this more or less in that. Now, when these little yellow things over here, these little yellow controls, they're the same as if you go into the object and you change the width, okay, and the height here, okay? So they're just little shortcuts that you can use to change the size of this plane. Now, as mentioned before, keep in mind that this is a parametric object, so I can go ahead and I can change the width and the height with those yellow things, and I can also do things like change how many polygons it's made out of and all that stuff. If I ever wanted to, as a matter of fact, why don't I do that? Why don't I give it twice as many polygons on the width than on the height? Doesn't really matter, but I just thought maybe that would be a nice thing to do. It kind of looks better. Okay, now, so we got the plane. Remember, we're going to texture this later. Okay, first, right now, we're just making the geometry. So now if you look at the reference, okay, you'll see that there's kind of like a tube. This thing is kind of like a tube that goes around the whole thing. So the perfect thing that one could use for that, okay, is we can go ahead and we can make what's called a torus. So a torus is a useful thing if you're making donuts, which is a popular thing to make these days in 3D programs. You could use it to make bagels. You could use it to make tires. Whole lot of cool things you can make with a torus. It's basically just a sphere that's swept around a circle. Now, as a parametric object, I can change a lot of things. I can change the radius of the ring. I can change more, give it more segments or less segments. I can even create this kind of a shape, which might be kind of cool. Here's how sort of thick it is. So I kind of want it a little bit thin. I want to change the pipe segments to, let's say, double to what they are now. I mean the ring segments to double what they are now, like 64. And I want to change its orientation so that way it's facing -Z, okay? And if I look at my reference, you can see that it's about this big. Okay, like I said, I'm just eyeballing it. We're just going over how to sort of make this thing more or less. So I'm just going to kind of make it about this big. And let's see. Well, it seems like it's a little bit smaller. Feels like it's a little bit smaller, so we'll just make it like down to about 130 and lower it, or 133. And then the pipe radius will make it down to about 12. Or 11. Like that. And so then that's how one would make that sort of pipe. Now what I want to do is I want to create this sort of surface where this copperish looking material is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose this disk. Okay, and there it is. You can see the disk over there. We'll make it -Z. And as a matter of fact, an easy way for me to make it sort of like in the exact center, same center as the torus, is I can take the disk and make it a child of the torus, right? And then I can zero out its coordinates. In this case, it's y coordinate. Okay. And now I know that this thing is exactly in the same center, because once you make an object a child of another object, that object assumes the coordinate system of the parent. So while the parent's, coordinate system can be anything, like if I move it up here, it's got some sort of crazy coordinate system, coordinates over here, but the child is always going to be using the parent's coordinates as its local coordinates. So if you were to zero out the child, it doesn't matter where the parent is, the child's coordinates at 0 is going to be right at the center, or right at the origin of this torus, which it is now. So let's undo that. And let's make this disk a little bit bigger. Okay, and then we'll also, what the heck, we'll give it a few more rings. Okay, so we'll give it like 32, why not? Just so that there's a little bit more. So you can see now that, if you were to look at it, since I zeroed it out, it's right in the center of that. And it's kind of like this thing has a little border around it. Now comes something a little bit more tricky. Okay, and we're going to use Mograph to help us do this. And what that is that if you look over here at the reference, you'll see that this ring is surrounded by all of these little cones and circles on them. Okay? So, now how do we do that? Well, what we could do is we could make a little cone and then move it a little bit and rotate it, and then move it a little bit and rotate it and move it, and then forget it, that'll take us all day. Okay, so we don't want to do it like that. That's a lot of work for nothing. Okay, so what we want to do instead is we would like to use something called a cloner object, a Mograph Cloner object, which is one of the most important things for Cinema 4D, this Mograph Cloner object. So what is that Mograph Cloner object? Well, let's go ahead into the Mograph menu and choose a cloner object. And there it is. Okay, so we've got our Mograph Cloner object. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a little cone. So we're going to create a little cone. There it is. Okay. And we're going to put that cone in the cloner object. And right away it starts to clone this object. Okay? Now obviously that cone is like too big. So we'll make the bottom radius a lot smaller. Okay, so we'll make the bottom radius, let's say 15, which is probably too small as well, so we'll make it like 12. And then we'll make the height of it, 24, let's say. And that's too small. So let's make the bottom radius 10, and the height of it 30. Okay, so we've got something like this. And it's still a little bit too much, but that's okay because we're going to fix it later. The thing is, the most important thing though, is that it's kind of like in this grid array. Okay, if you can look at these cubes here, these clones here, they look like they're in like an array of cones. And we don't want them in array. So if we go to the cloner object, we can see that the mode is set to grid. Okay? So for example, if we were to up this grid, we can have like a lot more. We could have like make a whole grid, and that can be useful if we wanted to make a gigantic grid of clones. But we don't want to do that. Okay? There's another one here, it's called a linear. Okay? And what this does is it makes our cubes sort of like, repeat themselves in a linear fashion. Okay, in this case, it's linear up, but they don't have to be linear up. They could be linear to the side or linear to the back. Okay, so you can control how you want that to be linear. If you want them to go along the floor, you make the Y 0 and you make the X, like that, and it'll clone it along that. And that's a little bit closer to what we want, but it's still not really what we want. Okay? So what we want instead is, there's other things too. There's a radial clone. So this is kind of cool because you could have these, go all around in a circle. Kind of like if, that could be useful for something. Okay? And the radius of it goes like this. Okay? And then there's another one here that's really useful. Actually, there's honeycomb. Honeycomb is kind of useful too because it arranges it in a grid format, but in a honeycomb way. So you can see that they're like offset. It makes kind of hexagon shapes here. So that is actually really useful to do as well. This comes in really, really useful if you want to put things in this sort of honeycomb pattern. And then there's also an object. This is really useful too, which you can clone things on the surface of an object. We'll save that for another time, but that can be really, really useful. But what we want to do actually is we want to use the linear, or we can actually leave it on the grid, right? But what we're going to do is we are going to create, cloners can have what are called effectors on them. And they can appear here under Mograph, effectors. And there's an effector called a spline effector. So before we create the effector, first what I want to do is I want to create the spline. You have to create a spline if you're going to use a spline effector. Okay? So let's go to a front view. There's my front view. And I will go ahead and I will create in the spline section over here. See, these are objects, 3D objects. These are splines here. Okay, I'm going to create a circle. Okay. Now, once again, I want this circle to be right in the center of these objects, so I'm going to make it also a child of the torus and change its coordinates to 0 on the y as well. So now that's also exactly in the center of that. And then what I'm going to do on the circle is I'm going to change its radius I'm going to bring that down and bring it down to about here. I don't have to be exact. 138, let's say. All right, now what I want to do is I want to duplicate these cones. I want to duplicate them on the spline. Okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the cloner object. Okay? First. And I'm going to go under the Mograph Effectors, and I'm going to choose the Spline Effector. And that creates a thing that's called, it's going to create a Spline Effector. Now, it says Spline, so you might think that it's a spline and not a Spline Effector. For example, if I were to draw a spline, like let's say a spline like this, right? You'll notice it also becomes spline. It says spline. And they look exactly the same, but they're completely different. One is an effector and one is a spline. So I just wanted you to be aware of that it says spline, but it is not a spline. It is a spline effector. If you want to remind yourself what it is, you could call it spline effector. Now you know it's a spline effector, and it's affecting the cloner. How do I know it's affecting the cloner? Well, if I click on the cloner and I go to the Effectors tab, you'll see that it's in there, the Spline Effector. Okay? Now, here's how it works. In the Spline Effector, we need to tell it what spline we want to use to affect these cones around the spline. So I'm going to click on the Spline Effector. Under Effector, under the Effector tab, I'm going to drag in that circle spline that we made under Spline. Okay? And then when I do that, you'll notice, let me hide the cube and the plane. And you'll notice that it's gone ahead and it's stuck our cones onto that spline. Okay? Now, you can see there's the spline, and it's sort of evenly put it onto that thing. Now what I want to do is obviously, well, the first problem is that it has put them in the center of the cubes. And I don't want to put them in the center of the cubes. I want to put them on the bottom of the cube. Okay, I want the bottom of this cube to be lined up with that. The other thing is that they're pointing the wrong way. So get in the Spline Effector, and what you have to do is you have to tell it what the up vector is. Okay? And the up vector, you could think it's the Z direction of the cone. So the cone, if you put this up to 1, you make the vector 1 on that direction, then that'll fix the problem. You could also make the vector 1 on this direction. That would flip that. And this one would flip it that way too, because it's sort of doing the same thing. But it's this one that you want to change, the up vector. So there you have it. So now it's kind of like starting to do the right thing. Okay? But the problem is that the clones are being affected onto the spline. They're being attached to the spline in the center of the clones. So the question is, so how do we have it go up? Right? So the reason that it's being affected, if I were to turn off the cloner for a minute, and we were to look at our original cone, let's hide the circle and the disc. Okay, and let's just show the cone. I'm going to drag the cone out for a minute, out to here. Here it is. If we were to look at this little cone here, okay, and we were to select it, we could see that its pivot or its origin is in the center of it, or at least in something that looks like the center of it. It is right in the center. So what we want to do is move that origin down to the bottom, or move the points up, either way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cone, right click it, and make it editable, so it's not a parametric object anymore. Select the point tool. Okay. Or there's another way to do this as well, but I'll do it this way for now. And I'm going to select all of these points here. Okay. And I'm going to drag this up, get it just right. And then if you look at this, if I were to go back to the object mode, you can see now that the origin is now not on the center of it, it's on the bottom of it. See, we've got our origin nicely on the bottom of that. And now what happens is if I bring back my spline effector and the cloner, and I actually have to drag this back into the cloner, okay, and we were to look at this now, we can see now, if I were to bring my spline back, we can see now that all of these objects are being attached to the spline on the bottom, on their bottoms, because the bottom is where their pivot point is. Okay? So if we bring back the Torus, we can see that you know, it's set up that like that, and it looks right. Now, these things are still a little bit big for me, but that's not a problem because I can go to the cone, okay? I can go to the cone, and let me turn off the cloner, see, so that the cones should be able to see the cone right here. Okay, and then what happens is that I'm going to take the scale tool, and I'm going to scale it down just a little bit, okay, and maybe scale it up on the Y axis, so it's a little thinner on the bottom, a little longer on the top, okay. And now let's turn the cloner back on, and then it's kind of like, anyway, it's getting to where we were at before, which is what I want, okay. So then now the thing about the spline thing, okay, the spline effector, is that if we look at our reference, you could see that it kind of stops right here and here. It doesn't keep going, otherwise you would see one sort of protruding into the box. So you can control that actually with the spline effector. You could tell it, okay? You could tell it, you could say, you could change the ending. So let's say the ending, so let's actually bring the cube and the plane back. Like that. And seems like in mine this thing was dug in a little bit more into the cloner, Torus. That's what we want to drag this a little bit down, a little bit more. And then if I go to the spline effector, I can change the offset here. You can go to negative values if you run out. And you could change this a little bit up, negative. And you could just get it to be exactly how you want. Oh, I've got an extra one in there. Okay. So let's, go down to about there. And like I said, I don't want to belabor it too much because, you know, just to give you the idea, because when we're going to start texturing this, then what we want to do, we're going to actually use the other one. We're just sort of seeing how this was built. So then there we go. So then you can create this type of a shape using the spline effector and the cloner. Now what I want to do is I want to put a little ball at the end of each one, because these are sharp and you could cut your finger if you touch them by accident. So what I want to do is I want to put a little ball so that, you know, nobody can hurt themselves with this. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to make a little sphere. Okay. And we'll go ahead and we'll scale this down. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we are going to now here's the thing. If you want to have more than one thing in your cloner, you can, if I were to drag this sphere in there, I want you to see what was happening. Let's make the sphere a little bit smaller still. Okay. See what happens, and that's kind of cool too if you wanted to do that, is that inside of a cloner, what it does is that it actually is cloning the sphere, and then it clones the cone, and then it goes to the sphere, and it goes to the cone, and it switches one off after another. Okay? But I don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a null object, drag that in the cloner, okay? And I'm going to put both of these things inside the null object. And then what's happening is that you might ask yourself, where did the cone go? And that would be a great question, because that's not supposed to happen like that. Let me see something like here. Cone. Cone is like that, right? Oops. So now the null, it's like that. Cone goes in the null. And it sticks it over here. Now this is odd. Okay, so this is very odd, because that should not be happening at all. So why would it stick it back there? Cloner, null. First of all, why is this cloner all the way on the X be 0? That shouldn't really matter. But, and the null now should be 0, right? So let's, once again, let's take a look at our other file to see what I did there, because from what I understand, the way I've always done it is that I've got the cloner, I've got a null, and inside the null, I've got a sphere and a cone. So let's see, let's go back here. So actually, these are the types of things that when they happen, this is the whole philosophy of CG Unscripted, is that when these things happen, to try to figure out how to get out of, you know, think your way out of these things, because obviously this should be happening. So we've got the cloner, and that's back there. Okay. Coordinates, null, cone. This doesn't matter. Oh, yes it does. So, okay, so the cone has to be in the 0, 0, 0. I didn't think it had to do that. That's odd. So now if I bring the sphere down there, okay, so now, okay. So anyway, I did not think that the cone had to be at the origin, but for some reason, I could have sworn it doesn't have to be at the origin, but for some reason it does. So if I were to hide this everything else, you know, you can see that you've got the cloner, and it's cloning. Without the null, you would have the sphere and you would have the cone, and it would sort of, and then the null, it's actually also cloning the null. Okay, so let me drag the null out of here. So you see it's doing like that. But with the null in there, okay, and the cone and the sphere in the null, it actually groups them together as one thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the sphere a child of the cone. So it uses its local coordinate space. And I'm going to move it up on the y, and you can see how it's moving up along the y-axis. Okay? But the thing is, it's a little bit still too big. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make it like 10, or maybe even like 8. Okay, and then move that down a little bit on the axis. Okay, and then we're going to get something like that. Okay, so now it's nice and safe. Nobody's going to cut their fingers on it, and we're good. So now we've got this. We've got everything is nicely done. Now it's going to come time to do the words CG. CG standing for computer graphics. Not collard greens or anything like that. That was a bad one, but it popped up in my mind. Couldn't help myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and how do you make text in this program? So in Cinema 4D. And the way you make text is you choose the text tool. So we're going to choose a text tool. Now, actually, come to think of it, when I made this originally, I did it on a different machine. I did it on my desktop machine, and I had another font in there. Boy, what was it called? I think it was an Adobe font. But I'm just going to use any font here because I don't even remember what it was. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our text spline. Okay, we're going to move it forward. Okay, we're going to align its center. Align middle. Okay, there it is. Okay, and instead of saying text, we're going to make it say CG. Okay, CG. Now, the thing is that you can see it just looks like a spline right now. Let me make it 0 on the X. And the way that you, well, first of all, let's choose a font, just any old font. Let's see, what fonts do I have here? Roboto, that kind of looks cool. I had sort of a rounded thing going on in my other thing. Let's just see if there's a, Rooney. I think that was it, actually. I think it was Rooney. That's certainly roundish. Kind of like that, actually. Let's see what the heavy looks like. All right, so we'll use that. That's fine. Now, in order to get this so that it doesn't look like a spline, we are going to go ahead and choose what's called an extrude object. Okay? And an extrude object, if we drag the text spline into the extrude object, you can see that it extrudes it. Okay? It extrudes it forward, actually. And if you click on the extrude, you can see that. You can see what the offset is going to be. You can change the offset of the extrusion. Now, if you'll notice that on the reference over here, you notice that there's like kind of like a rounded edge on the front. See that? Kind of a rounded edge. And the way that was done is if you go to the letter and you go under caps and you choose bevels, both bevels, size of the bevel, you can see that you can actually start putting like a nice rounded edge on it. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll do it at around 5. Now, there's also the amount of steps in the bevel. Right now, this is at 3. You can see that there's 3 steps here. So we're going to up that to about 5 as well. Okay? So we've kind of have, you know, it doesn't, if you do more of a bevel, like a bigger size, then, you know, you could get more of a balloony type of letters. But I think this is fine, like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we are going to stick it sort of on here. And, you know, it doesn't really matter, but you might ask yourself, well, why is the pivot for the thing not on the letters? It's back here, and then the letters are over here, right? Because actually the pivot for the letters is over here where it should be on the letters, okay? But this pivot is the pivot for the extrude. So what you could just do is you could just click on the text spline and you could just zero out its Z depth, its Z position. And now that the extrude is for both of them are in the same place, you might prefer to work like that. It really doesn't matter, okay? So we'll go over here like that. One thing I want to do is I want to move the letters closer to each other. So in the text spline under object, okay, what we can do is we can, where would we do it? Vertical spacing. So if we were to, no, it's not vertical spacing. I guess it would be kerning really, but it's really more like tracking. There we go, tracking. So you see, you track it in. So to track in those 2 letters, you just go to the text object and you open up this little kerning thing, and then here's where you can track the letters. Okay? And now what we're going to do is we're going to make the text also a little bit smaller over here. Okay? And then we're going to move that up to about right here. Okay, so now we got the CG in there. And now, so now for the next thing that we're going to make is this, you can see that there's like a little, sort of like kind of a crownish looking thing here. And so how was that done? Okay. So the way that was done is, is that we're going to go to a front view, okay, and we're going to move up around here, and we are going to take the spline tool. Now, if you used Illustrator before, you'll know about this spline tool, okay? Because if I start dragging things out, you can see that I'm dragging out Bezier curves. Now in Illustrator, to break a curve, then you hold down the Alt key and you drag out from the point. That's not going to work here, or maybe it is. Nope, doesn't work. It actually changed the view. The way to do it here is you press down the Shift key, break that point, okay? And then go ahead and draw the next point. I don't even really remember what this shape looked like. Okay. And then break it again here because it comes to a point. Come in here. Break it again here. Come in here. You know. And break it again here. Whatever. I'm not going to really actually, like I said, when we're going to texture this, we're going to use the other thing that I made. wait, actually I have to use the spline tool again if I want to break this one. Yeah, there we go. Oops. Yeah. So I'm not going to worry about making this so perfect, but now I can go back with the spline tool and I can go back and I can fix this thing as if I was working in Illustrator. Okay? Or if you want, by the way, if you're more comfortable working in Illustrator, okay, and you're used to, you know, like you might want to just do half of this and copy the other half over, then you can import that as a spline into Cinema 4D, and voila, you know, you can do it that way instead. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and do whatever we're going to do here, like that. And we're not going to really labor over it because we're not going to texture this one anyway. So we'll get something that looks like that, which looks a little bit kind of strange right here. But that's what it's going to be. Doesn't this one look bigger than that one? But anyway, kind of the same size. So now we've got this shape. Oops, I started making another curve here. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to hit Escape. So now what I'm going to do is that if I go to my perspective view, you'll see that I've got the spline there. So I'm going to call it Spline. I'm going to call it the crown. Crown spline. Okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose Extrude. And I'm going to stick that crown spline into the Extrude object. And doesn't look like anything's happening. Why? Now that's weird. That is very, very weird. And the question is that why is that happening? Wow. Talk about strangeness. Not even selecting it. Oh, because this was that second spline that I was making. So there's nothing in it. Okay, remember I started making a second spline and then and then I hit Escape. So that's why. So let's go ahead and delete that and stick this spline in it. This is the crown spline. Okay? You can see it's sticking out of the top, like sticking out right there. And we're going to call this the crown spline. All right, and then we're going to take this extrude and we're going to extrude it in less. Okay, something like that. I might move it back a little bit. And then I will also make it have a bevel. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say on the caps, I'm going to say the size, we'll make it like 2 centimeters. Ooh, that's too many. So we'll make it 1 centimeter. And then I want to have it like a sharp thing. So instead of 3 segments, I'm going to have 1 segment. So now it's kind of sharp there. And that's the look that I wanted to go for. Okay? Because if you look on this, that's sort of the look that we have. We have a little bevel, but it's not roundy. So then, and for the final thing, I just took like a little sphere, okay, and maybe give it more things like that, and I shrunk it down to about here, okay, and then moved that up to right around here, okay. So the center was right, where is the center? Right here. And then I took the scale tool and I just, first of all, I made it editable, but you can just hit the C key And that will also make it editable. And then I scaled it down, because the reason I did that, and then I scaled the whole thing down, is just so you know, the thing is that if I make a sphere, or any parametric object for that matter, but in this case a sphere, let's just move it over here for now. Oops. If I choose the scale tool, I can't scale it in one dimension because it's a parametric object. It wants to always stay a sphere. But if I make it editable by hitting C or by choosing make editable here, now I can scale it differently in different dimensions. Okay? So, now we're almost done with this thing. Okay? Because what we want to do is, if we look at the reference here, okay, you could see that there's like little feet. This thing has little feet on it. Okay? So the thing is, I want to put little feet on this. So I'm going to go to a front object, front view. Okay, and I'm going to make a little cube. And I'll scale it down to be about, you know, whatever, the size of a foot. And we'll go ahead and we'll bring this over to here. Okay, something like that. And I'm going to hit C to make it editable. Okay, scale it a little bit up in the Y direction. Okay, so now, since this is editable now, okay, let's actually hide everything but that foot. So everything's being hidden but that foot. Since it's editable now I can go ahead and I have access to the points. So if you look at the original, I mean at the reference, you'll notice that the feet are slightly tapered. See, there's like a little bit slanted in. So to do that, I can just take these 2 points and I can just drag them in a little bit like that. And maybe take these 2 and drag them the other way a little bit. And just get that look. Now, what I want to do is I want to give this shape a little bevel. Oops, did I mess something up here? Looks like I messed something up. Let me go to a top view. No, I didn't mess anything up. Why does that look weird? Let me go to a front view. Oh, okay, maybe because that's... I did mess something up. Okay. So, like that. This may be going a little bit like this. This a little bit like that. Okay, now it's not messed up anymore. All right, now, the thing is that now that this is editable, I want to give it a little bevel. But the thing is that if I were to make a cube, okay, and I can always bevel this cube with what's called a fillet. See that? I've given it a fillet, otherwise known as a bevel. But once I move it away from being a parametric object and I hit the C key, so now it's a polygonal object, you don't have that option to bevel it. So how can I actually bevel this thing? Okay, because it's not there anymore. And the way to do it is by using what's called a Bevel Deformer. And they can be found under our deformers here. There's one here called Bevel. So if I choose that, and if I go ahead and I drag that as a child of that, you notice it starts beveling this thing. Okay? Now, so now what I want to do is I want to say, so it's giving it a bevel. It's a little bit big. Now the nice thing about this bevel, is that it's non-destructive. Because I could actually bevel the geometry too, and then it burns it in there. Burns it into the geometry. But by using the deformer, it doesn't. I can always turn it off, and then you're back to the original cube. Or turn it on. Or I can always change it. I can make it thinner. Let's say I only want it like this big. Okay, or if I only wanted it, let's say we'll make it a little bit bigger. We'll make it that big, and we'll only give it 3, segments. So that's what I did with the feet. Now let's show everything else. Okay, there's our thing. We'll go to a side view. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll take that foot and we'll move it sort of like here. Let's say right here and here. Okay, we'll control drag it back to make a copy of it. So now I've got it on the front and back. Okay, and then I'll select that and that, and we'll drag this back. Now the only problem is that these on this side are facing the wrong way, because I want the slanted side to be this way. I want it to cut this way a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of them, let's say, go to the point mode, hit Command A, oops, hold on, hit Control A. Oh, that selects everything. Why? Well, okay. Well, that did, oops. Just so you're not going to get confused, I'm going to hide this box and this plane. Okay, and then I'm going to select this cube here. And then what I'm going to do is, as a matter of fact, I can select both of these. Yeah, so they're all selected. And then under this little thing over here, this is actually called the coordinate manager. It's different from these coordinates because these coordinates have something called scale. I don't want to mess around with the scale. Okay? I want to go over here to the coordinate manager, and there's something else over here. It's called okay, hold on a second. Oh, maybe you can only do one at a time. All right, so now why is this not working? Because I have 2 selected? Yes. So I'll do the first one. This is called size. It's not scale, it's size. So the size on the X, if I go ahead and just pick a negative, it's going to flip it. Okay, so I don't know if you see that, but I'm going to take this other one, select that, flip that. Okay, so now if I look at this, okay, basically what's going to happen is that there we have it. We've got our legs now. Now, for the next couple of things, I'm just going to create a shelf by creating like a little cube, making that smaller. Okay, dragging this down to here, making it wider. Okay, there's my little shelf. Okay, and then this will be sitting on the shelf. Okay, and then for the back wall, where the wall is in the back, we're going to go ahead and we are going to make a plane. So let's go ahead, not an airplane, but a plane like that. We're going to tell it, okay, go -Z. Make it bigger, like that. And we might, in this case, and for reasons that we're going to talk about next time, is we're going to say, we're going to up the width segments to, let's say, 16 by 16, or 20 by 20. Okay, and then voila. So that's basically how this thing was created. Okay? Now the question is that how do we go from this to this, a lit and rendered one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up, if you have downloaded these files from Gumroad, you will have a file called, or you could also do it on this one if you want to do it on your own one. But if you want to, you don't have to. You can actually go ahead. There should be one in here called CG U for CG Unscripted, Untextured. And there it is.